Welcome to this May BVSSH meetup. I wanted to start first by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that we're all sitting on today and where we're all meeting. And I would like to pay my respects to their eldest past and present. I've been looking forward to this conversation for a few weeks now. And the motivation really is that over the last few months, I've seen, I think others have seen, that there's a bit of a tightening of the belt that has happened, kind of in organizations. And so when that happens, that impacts investment spend, that impacts risk appetite. Sometimes people retreat, kind of inwards. And so what that has meant is that there might have been an impact to transformation budgets and appetites. Some have been making cuts, some have not, some publicly, some a little bit more in stealth, kind of hidden mode. And so I think we need to talk, let's have a chat about that. What has that meant? But I also think that getting stuff done in organizations today has actually not gotten any easier. In fact, it's gotten harder. There's too much going on. We don't have enough focus generally on improvement. And the management models often that we're working within our organizations, they're still not quite yet fit for today's world of work. And this is why we're also passionate about disruption in the sense of ways of working and delivering, better outcomes and creating a more humane world of work. And at least I hope that's why you're all here today. So my sense that there's also a bit of a pivot point in the Agile community. So I think what we've learned, the hard yards of process-led, the framework-heavy, big bang kind of things, they really haven't yielded the results that we thought they would, that we expected, that we hoped. And so what that has meant is there's still lots of strategy, there's still lots of delivery, there's still lots of ways of working that needs doing, that needs to get better, and, from a better, value, sooner, safer, happier kind of way. So that's really what we're going to be kind of talking about and exploring today. I've brought together a couple of people here in terms of a panel who I've known for a long time, all three of them. So let me start with introducing Emily Mojic. And I describe Em as an enterprise agility guru and improvement leader who's worked in industry for a handful of years now and brings kind of firsthand practical realities, learnings, lessons, wins as to what that has all meant from what I've just talked about. We've got Mirko Herring. Mirko and I go decades back now, who is the global DevOps leader for Accenture and was just in Colombia. And he's got a great book, by the way, as well, for those of you who don't know. So welcome to Mirko, welcome to Em. And Niall, I would describe Niall as an agility consultant, and he's the founder of Source Agility and has this real passion for helping, the Agile community, Agile coaches really focus in on value and accountability because there's a shift that we need to make kind of as Agile practitioners as well. So lots of experience here. I'm Maria Muir, for those who I haven't met yet, but I see some familiar faces already kind of in the Zoom room. I'm the Asia Pacific leader for Sooner, Safer, Happier. And then there's all of you. And I welcome all of you today because I would very much like to encourage everyone's participation in this. I think we'll have a good conversation between the four of us, but I've shared the questions with deliberate intent so that you see kind of the things that we'll be covering, the things that we'll be asking, the things that we'll be unpacking, because if you've got something that you wanted to add to that or a question that you wanted to share or ask, please do. So please come off mute. Please, feel free to jump in. You will not be interrupting. Otherwise, please use the chat if you like, and we'll be having a quick look at that as well along the way. So with that, let's get started. And I thought we would get started with kind of setting the scene a little bit and the impact and implications of kind of a tightening market and what have we actually sensed? What are we seeing? So Mirko, given the fact that you've just come back from Colombia, the other side of the world, 40 hours away, from your perspective globally, what trends are you sensing? What are you seeing? Tell me your thoughts.
Yeah, and I think you're very correct with what you said up front, right? Which is the belt tightening. And I think it's an opportunity, it's a threat. I mean, depending on how you look at it, it's probably the most visible thing that we saw a few months ago now was the Capital One announcement. I'm sure many people have picked that one up with over 1,000 agile roles disappearing. And Capital One was for a long time, I know a bunch of people in there because they've been pretty much on the forefront of this kind of agile DevOps transformation, very publicly, very much in conferences. And quite interesting that they took that step. And you can go through a bunch of other examples as well. But I think the interesting thing for me is when I talk to the people on the ground, and I was in the US, I was in Colombia, spoken to a couple of people in Europe, is that the organizations still have the pressure of getting things done better, right? So that has not gone away. But what has gone away is if you can't explain how you add value to this journey, then you will be questioned. And I think we had a bit of a luxury where we could afford to have a DevOps coach, an agile coach, this and that, and something else that were not necessarily embedded in delivery. And I think that kind of has gone away. And I can't tell from everyone I've spoken to, that doesn't seem to be coming back anytime soon. So what that brings back to us, I think, is everyone who wants to be part of these transformations and help organizations along the way is really, we need to sharpen what's the value that we're providing. And we know how hard that is, right? It's so difficult to say, it is a lot easier when the CIO comes in and said, let's do an agile transformation. And we're like, yeah, let's get some agile coaches and get this and that and something else. And then we're measuring progress by how many people we've trained. And, we have like more agile teams and those kind of things. But asking about real value, that's a difficult conversation. And I think that's where we're really honing in on. And if I go back to my colleagues in Capital One that I know, like they have definitely gone to the agile roles have gone away, but they haven't gone away from delivery. So now it becomes like, an agile delivery person is still a very valuable thing to do, but you can't just be agile. You have to then also lead the team or, consider some of the release activities, like more like an RTE in the kind of safe language. And that stuff still exists. So I think we will see less specific agile roles where your role is to be agile and a lot more in what is the specific value that you're providing to a delivery function. And that might not be a bad thing because I personally had a pet peeve with a lot of the agile coaches that come in and just preach another methodology and say, this is not the real agile and all that kind of stuff. And we're now a lot more focused on what are the bottlenecks that we are trying to address and resolve.
So can I ask you, do you have a perspective on, do you think it's just been a matter of time that this has happened? Because, agile over the world has kind of matured and it's gotten to that point where it's a pivot point, or even in Australia, the last 10 years, or is it drawn on like economic conditions? Or is it a mix of both?
I think it's a mix of both. And I get the same in the DevOps world, right? Because everyone is kind of saying this thing has run its course and, we come like, there's a bit of the air coming out of the balloon. But I think it's, there's not the next thing. Like no one is kind of looking out at what the next kind of buzzword will be that we'll get behind. We're now at the point where I think the catalyst is gone, right? You can't just say agile and something will change. So we now need to really kind of work on the ground and really change something. So I think it's a bit of both. It was the opportunity for organizations to call quits, which fair. Like if you didn't get value so far, you can call quits now and no one is going to beat you up over it. And there's not, but the other guys are more agile than us. That doesn't count really anymore. But I think it's been coming. I think people have started to really like, where do we get value? What are these? Who's actually here on the ground with us helping change versus who's on a soapbox preaching some kind of methodology?
Yeah. So now from a local perspective, so that was, kind of globally, thank you, Marco. From an Australia point of view, any different or is it the same? What do you think?
I suppose I talk to lots of people all day like yourself, Maria, and what I've done is just assembled a few snippets of conversation. I can only talk from my experience with the people I'm talking to are out in the field doing the work. So I've got a few things I've tried to map into some themes to respond to your question. And I think the hub and spoke as a method for managing a centre of expertise is a common way of considering it. I think the powers and the effort has gone out to the spokes and into the business away from the hub. The hub the hub seems to almost have shrunk down to a pinpoint. I know in some organizations it's barely, I was talking to one guild lead of a way of working competency in a very large financial institution that's based here in Victoria. And they shared with me that I don't have any power to do anything, but I own the Agile coaching practice for the enterprise, tens of thousands of people. And it was the smallest hub I've ever seen. So I think that the power is getting out the spokes and out into the business. And the business is hiring the people they need to do what they need to get done. To Mirko's point there, that's probably more to do with accelerating getting things done than it is around culture or behavioural or any of the more nuanced aspects. So certainly the hub is shrinking and the spokes seem to be more of the decision makers in bringing practices, people who do our Agile practices. I was speaking to a few service designer type folks around town, and they're saying work has really started to go away. This abstract work, service blueprint design, this let's get on the balcony and really look across the way we deliver things to people and experiences seems to be losing traction at the moment. People aren't taking the time to stop and think about an end-to-end experience that needs to be underpinned with platforms and process and ways of working. So they're really struggling to find relevance in this difficult market as service designers. Busyness. I haven't seen anything like it. I know, Maria, you've posted on it, as I have, with the busyness disease we have. But more, it seems at the director level in public service it's out of control. People are really extremely almost frantic in looking at their activity to ensure they're out and about and doing things as opposed to having impact or outcomes. So the busyness bug and what that has meant, and 2 or 3 clients I'm working with at the moment, I've spent 6 weeks trying to get senior C-level people into a room to just think about their vision for the future. What does the world look like in 6 months, or 12 months? So this time, this slack in the day to simply look at the future, I'm not seeing people having it, which is really disappointing. So it's all facing down into the work and getting things out the sausage machine, but without that getting up on the balcony, looking at the service or looking at the vision. That's quite disappointing because people run off and build the wrong thing really efficiently and quickly. So that's something I've been seeing. The cost, and that comes with not wanting to pay the cost of change. So everybody is in the urgent and important quadrant. And as we go through the dip of change, there's a price to pay in terms of interrupting your operational cadence. And that price, I'm finding no one's willing or wanting to pay it. They want to implement Agile, but don't want to pay the price to absorb change into the way they work, which is, again, really disappointing because we're always feeling we're in a rush to do what we're doing. And without slack, we get cognitively loaded and then we can't have perspective on the change process. And I find that's very disappointing as well, which creates this sort of level of anxiety in a lot of the people I'm talking to. What else is some of the things I've been seeing? Yeah, the deeper human work in post-COVID remote world is really suffering and struggling. And it probably relates to some of my other points. I know practitioners in the behavioural change Agile space who almost came into their career in the post-COVID world and they just put on their profile, I just do remote work. And I find that really disappointing and really sad. I know people have their life and their choices, and I'm going to talk about this in our follow-up question around the future, but I do think we're entering a pivot point. I do agree with you, Maria. I really think we're in a time to deeply introspect on the human work we do, the knowledge work we do, and what that means as practitioners and what it means for Agile more broadly. Yeah.
Yeah. So what resonates about what you said there, Niall, for me, and is aligned with what I'm seeing and hearing too, is this disconnect between strategy to execution. So not having enough alignment there. So the sitting out on the balcony bits that you're talking about. The second thing is way too much work, way too much. It's almost like we've entered into 2023 on steroids from 2019. And so we haven't quite gotten the right balance there, right? And then the lack of focus on continuous improvement, because I think you're right. And with added by the tightening of the belt, it's then we don't have money, we don't have time to focus on the system to then improve. So yeah, I see those things too. So I wonder.
Sorry, just one point on that, because I like the hub and spoke conversation, because I do think that there's a lot more money budgets allocated from the business. So there's a lot less kind of internal IT that used to be where a lot of the transformation sits, and it's always a business, right? There's no money given to IT anymore. And I think it's disappointing to then connect this with a bit on the service designers, because I would have assumed that product management would take a lot more interest now. And if that's not the case, then that can't lead to good outcomes. Then we have just feature factories.
Yeah, it's just my experience. I welcome others to comment on that, to see if that is a thread that resonates with other people. There'll be lots of people on the call that have an opinion on that, Maria, I'm sure.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to open up a poll. I did have 2 quick questions for the audience, if you would care to humor me, just to get us warmed up. So a bit of what's your role, so we can understand kind of who's who in the zoo. And have you noticed the tightening of the belts? Just a quick yes, no, not sure. This
is where we need to have some exciting music.
I know, exactly. All right, that's mostly everybody. That's just filled it in there. So hopefully you can see that, but we've got kind of half of us are kind of in the agility, disrupting ways of working space, and then a mix of delivery, product, and some other. Oh, I should have been more creative about my poll choices. Sorry, folks. And then the last, I think, overwhelming majority of us are noticing it too. So I think this is, timely conversation then for us. Okay. Well, let's get into the heart of it then, because if we've kind of just set the scene, then what I would love now to then talk about is what's the so what? What do we then do with it all? How do we need to respond? And Mirko, you've talked some about it already. Now you're talking, started it up too, but how might we need to pivot our approach then to help us realize value from ways of working? So I think if we start there, because it is all about the value, I think, and would love to hear your thoughts on this one.
Yeah, look, absolutely. Pivoting the approach to be all about value is certainly a lens that we should dive straight through and have a look at. We've evolved in so many frameworks and technical solutions for so many things, and we're all delivering in very complex environments, complex systems. And so, where the buck stops is that value for that. And so as ways of working, what do we need to look at where value is not clear? And in my experience, some of it has been where we haven't measured very well, to be honest. We've coached to the practices and behaviours, we've implemented frameworks and how-tos and playbooks, but we haven't really got that value measurement, so to speak. And I've just had the privilege of, having 3 months in working in public health. And something struck me, which was quite different in public health, is maybe coming from a medical background, they're science-based, they're very measured. And so every plan, do, study, act cycle, every, PDSA cycle was a very purposeful measure of what are we trying to influence here, or what impact are we expecting to see. And that level of discipline was for whether it was a change for one shift, for 4 beds in a ward, or whether it was looking at implementing a new diabetes clinic. So I just really think that science look at looking at some of our measures can really help in that pivot point. And some of the places in the past where I think I could have done better in roles that I've been at as well, is really taking more of the measures. And through that, which can be quite challenging, we all know the value piece. So we have to try and fail and get better at that, along with our adaptive cultural changes that we'll always, I think, continue to work on.
Yeah, totally agree. So it's almost like if you've started, or if you're going and you don't have them, measures, put in the data, put in the measures. Otherwise, how do you know? I think, totally spot on. And in terms of value articulation, go for it, Mirko. Did you want to add anything on that?
No, I just want to add that there's a positive note on this, because if you go, I've been in a lot of conferences over the last few months, and if you go to the vendor hall, you will see that a lot of the vendors have pivoted from these kind of automation tools towards measurement, right? So you will see value stream tools, you will see a lot of investment in that. So there's not an excuse anymore that you have to come up with an architecture for this. You just have to choose something and then kind of start getting the measures into it. So I think there's definitely a positive note that there's more support coming.
Yeah, absolutely. I think from a tooling perspective, I can add my 2 cents on that, is that I think there is still some ways to go from a tooling and platform point of view to be focused on the value, because a lot of it still is the traffic lights, traditional schedule, all those metrics, which are good, but what could be better is, looking at other things that actually help improve the system and the value delivery.
And how we're organized, right? So a lot of the complex organizations, even with tooling, in some parts, it's difficult to see what that value or flow efficiency value is. And so
the tools are not going to solve it, right? You have to think about what is actually valued.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I was recently brought in to help an organization with their procurement end-to-end process, and I sat down to do the value stream mapping workshop, and it's the only time I didn't leave the session with a great value stream map, because they were so unaware of what their own process was. They happened to have offshored it to a vendor, and they didn't even know what was happening. They didn't even know where the data was. And I left that meeting flabbergasted. But I think it goes to the point of when then we send a practitioner in to say, well, let's implement some agility here. And wherever anyone will listen to me as a practitioner, so the very first thing you need to do is, well, define value and know how it's made and draw it roughly on a napkin. I don't care. Have something to baseline your work on so that you can understand the impact of any proposed changes to that way of working. And I don't know, I'm open to be challenged, but I'd like to take a poll. How many people have done a value stream map who are on this call and they're an agile practitioner? Like facilitated an end-to-end walk the process and produced an artifact with process efficiency and recommendations on where the flow is constrained. I think that needs to be a first-class citizen in everyone's handbook. And if you haven't done it, that's great. That's fine. It's a great opportunity to learn. Find someone and sit in and shadow them and get it the first thing you insist on doing before you start work. Otherwise, how do you prove value from the work you do?
There's a ton of what I call tool blindness. Right, it's like snow blindness. Like you just see the tool and then everything else gets lost. And I think a lot of organizations are a bit like that. Like they have a tool for HR management, and then hence no one can explain the process anymore because they just believe that the tool does it. And the same, you can take any tool really for that.
Yeah, and Donna's adding in the chat that there's so much noise when it comes to the tools. They cost more money, but we need to take our own approach. So I think that's resonating. And just on the value stream map, Niall, Matt's saying that they don't start or stand up teams without it. So it sounds like we've got some proponents there. Yeah, and I'm a big fan of them too. It is like the quickest way to get engagement, co-design, understanding of handoffs, bottlenecks. What are the things that you like? The impediments are the path. Like, how do you actually find out what you need to focus on to then be able to unlock that value?
And it takes a high degree of emotional intelligence and consultative conversational skills to walk a process and talk to people to get them to be open and vulnerable about what is and isn't happening. That it is a non-trivial piece of consulting work that has a lot of sort of softer skills as well as just simply getting the numbers right. So a great challenge, a great development.
I think there's a question here of accountability as well. So sometimes a coaching approach can be very hands-off, here to help guide, impart wisdom, but actually having that sort of accountability and skin in the game, which is a balance, right, between having a bit of independence, being able to challenge in that space as well. But I think that pivot point is coming closer to, out of the enablement functions and closer to the business where delivery and value is happening. I think accountability also needs to shift for how we are improving and enabling that improvement as well. So I think that'll be an interesting space.
Yeah.
So do you guys have any? Oh, go ahead now.
Oh, I was just going to do a plug for my accountable agility system, which is exactly that. So I deploy coaches with a scorecard on, what practices will mean, they've delivered, right? And first and foremost is these ones around value. And I think it's just common sense, but
So I wonder, do you guys have any perspectives on, so what outcomes, what measures, how do we articulate that value? What should we be going after? I've got mine. the better value, sooner, safer, happier. What do you guys use?
I think it goes back to Emily's question though. Are we enabling or driving change? Are we making the system visible for others to make decisions about changing the way they work, or are we rolling our sleeves up and embedding ourselves to help, enact new processes in the business? Are we staying in the hub and advising, or going out into business and rolling our sleeves up as an embedded helper?
That's a bit of a sacred coaching kind of, different almost religion there as to no, I coach versus I do, and if I need to take the wheel and help steer, and that can be a really challenging part to balance. Too far the other way, you're doing all the do and people aren't learning. Too far back, people feel like it's so hands off. So it does create it does need a lot of intelligence, emotional intelligence, to read the room, read the system. How is it evolving? What do I need to change in terms of maybe the approach for ways of working to sort of get better results? And have I been in that space for too long as well? Another common question I get asked is, how long should a coach be in one area? I don't know, to the room. What are the thoughts?
I'm not seeing anything pop up in the chat. Marco, Niall, you had thoughts?
I don't really have that luxury, given that I usually are long delivery functions, right? So for me, it's more I have to extract myself. But I see Ben raising his hand, so there we go. Ben.
I think if they're still there at 6 months and they haven't delivered, I think we need to have a bit of a think about, are they well sponsored? And if they're well sponsored and nothing's changing, what's going on?
I'll chip in if that's right. So I'm quite lucky enough to have been in a couple of large engineering organisations, financial, and now in like tech scale up. And when I was in the large organisations, we moved on every 3 to 6 months, because the Pareto principle meant there was usually a different bottleneck and a different problem we had to go and move on to. So we'd whack-a-mole, hit the thing down, got the sustainability around that particular niche area of the bottleneck, but then there's usually something else that was popping up. I would definitely want to support Niall about his point about value stream mapping. I was a lean practitioner before I moved into Agile. I wasn't getting through software, and I don't think I could do an Agile coach job without it, because there's so many fundamental core principles, and I think it's called Lean Agile as opposed to Agile Lean, and I really subscribe to that. And Lean starts with the 2 pillars of continuous improvement and people, respect for people. And so therefore it just plays through in everything that we do. So big plug for Lean.
And they're the beautiful thing in there, because I think it gives us half the answer. So I only have like really 2 measures or 2 groups of measures that I use. One is exactly what comes out of the value stream, because any kind of efficiency we can measure in our value stream, we can figure out where the bottleneck are, or where the quality leaks are, and that's what we're going to measure. And then we improve it, and then we need to move on and find the next bottleneck and measure that. And the other group of measures are what I call the experiment and expand measures, which is how quickly can we run an experiment on a feature, on a user story, whatever. And then how quickly do we know that it's successful, and how quickly can we scale it up, right? So you have, in my view, you have efficiency measures, and then you have measures around experiment and expand.
Yeah, I really like that framing, Marco. Joe, you also had your hand up. Did you want to add?
It was just a question around how long should a coach stay, and I think it depends on how much change is in that space, because you can do your 6-month stint and they're stable and you can leave if you embedded and worked with them and handed on. But if all of a sudden in month 5 they go through a change, a significant change, then your stay might be longer. If there's an influx of, like they double in size, and all of a sudden you've got to really do another coaching session. So I think the answer is it depends on how much change is in the group you're working with.
Yeah, and I think Donna agrees, Joe. It depends on the coach and who you're working with and at what level. So I think there's multiple levels there.
Can I add to that? Can I say it depends on the value? So, yes, there may be a change that requires more coaching and support, but what other value opportunities are we seeing at the moment that might be in the organisation or another business area to say that, yes, there might still be a coaching proposition in that area, but there may be more value somewhere else. I think sometimes we're a little bit too slow to move because we also value deep relationships in those areas. Yeah. And sometimes, I think sometimes our danger could be that we stay too long.
Good provocation.
Thanks, Jo.
And yes, readiness for areas to change, absolutely.
And so Paul's just added as well, to the idea of the metrics, cost of delay. Anyone use that? That's powerful. Yep. Head nods from Marco, head nod from me too.
Cost of not changing needs to be really high so that the way of working is going to be worth it, the change. I just wanted to put a softer metric in because we're talking a lot about lean work and numbers and flow efficiencies and things. Change needs to be safe to change. We need to have sponsorship to implement change. And a lot of people on this call will know that often if we're talking to coaches about accountabilities, I will say to them, your first job is to meet with your sponsor, have a conversation, and then the measure is, are you invited back for a second one? So I think that's really important. We can't lose fact that we're doing human work, and we can do all the value stream maps in the world, but if we aren't sponsored to implement change and it's not safe to implement change, then no change will happen. People don't change because they have the numbers, they change because of how they feel about it. And we need to get that right too.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Michael, you've got your hand up. Did you want to add something?
Yeah, I find it interesting that we're talking about how long do we stay in a piece in terms of, well, can we get quickly out? It's like, so do we actually have an intrinsic value here? Because as soon as we're in, we're then got a clock on how long do we have to be here before we could get back out to go somewhere else. And it's like, so what's actually happening in terms of the value of the person? Is there no value in a company of an agile person being there? And in actual fact, it's like the most instant thing possible of getting them in, fix our things and get them out as quickly as we can.
Yeah, it's a good challenge, isn't it? So how we orientate towards the role we play. And, we're not doing a ticker box exercise and making the person feel unsafe because, geez, if you haven't done this by this time, you're a failure, and yeah, I think it's a fair challenge. And as Jo said, it's all about context. Is it a stable system or not?
And it's an ongoing tension field, right? And I think that's a good thing. And the question is how we keep making people sensible to it. Because I remember people who have been in a coaching role and then became all the way hands-on into delivery that you wouldn't differentiate them from the normal delivery team. And that's nice, but not really that helpful because then no one is changing anything anymore. They're just starting to write code or do testing or whatever they do, or just become a project manager. But on the flip side, if you stay too far away from it, then you're unlikely to make the impact that you want to do because as soon as you leave the room, they go back to what they've done before. So I think we need to, ideally you get to the point that there's enough people on each team that are change agents that keep pushing you forward, but you have to perhaps a little bit idealistic. So how do we seed this correctly and keep that tension field valid?
And the question about how long was a contentious question. It's like asking how much testing should we do before we release? Is there a standard answer for that, anyone? No. So,
42.
Yeah, so absolutely. There are many lenses. Yeah, many lenses to inspect. And I would just encourage us to inspect the value lens of our coaching. And is there greater value somewhere else? Is there readiness somewhere else? That's the question I guess I was posing.
So my challenge then, so when we're articulating value, my challenge maybe, Marco, I'll start with you first, because as a consultant, I feel like we're always holding the tension because we're always kind of on the inside, but definitely on the outside. So when you're articulating that value, up to the execs and the team, does that the way that you describe the metrics, does that resonate with them? How do you get them over the line?
It is actually quite surprising that a lot of organizations don't want that. Like it seems to be an uncomfortable conversation for them to actually allow me to measure kind of what we need to work on, because there's plenty of stakeholders in there that have, perhaps built some of these solutions or on these processes or whichever way you want to see it. So it's actually an education with my clients to say, hey, we need to do this, because at the end of the day, you could pay me to just do, some agile, some DevOps, whatever the specific thing is, and move to the cloud, a digital transformation. But I want you to actually help. And that means we need to do a bit more diagnosis on your side. It tends to stand very, very well with the very senior people. It tends to work really, really well with the junior people because they kind of suffer under it. And then you have that whole middle area that has this vested interest. And I think that's the really tricky thing to navigate. And it's the same on the business side. So that's kind of on the efficiency measures. On the business side, I find it very similar. Very senior people have a very clear vision. That's what they want to achieve. But then you get into people who own specific business processes or part of the product. And they surprisingly don't really want to be measured. And I think that's the thing that we just need to make safe, right? And I keep telling people, like, if we measure features and if the feature doesn't get used, that is success, because you've learned that you've invested in the wrong thing and you can avoid this going forward. And I think that's going to be for a little while, and it's even more dangerous because people might then think, well, if my product or my feature is not successful, am I the one who has to leave the organization? I just nicely asked to leave. So I think it's really helping that kind of middle ground and making that safe and having that conversation with the people at the very top to say, like, this is valuable for us to learn and to understand. I mean, you need to make it safe for your people to actually accept that.
Yeah, and Mirko, I think we've conflated cost out productivity strategies with Agile for far too long. So nobody feels that an Agile transformation is a safe place, especially the middle managers. So I think you've hit the nail on the head there.
And so Adam in the chat is also talking about value and sponsorship and how that's critical and how leaders need to be supported along the change. So I wonder then, and Mirko, in that, you've called out the section that we need to be talking about there. So keen for your thoughts. Like, what do you think then is the role of those leaders? How do we need to influence them? How do we need to support them? What do they need to change?
Yep. So I'm going to assume.
Go.
So that for me, Marie, or Mirko?
Yeah, for you.
Yeah. We just touched on, I guess sometimes I've been exploring looking at situations or problems from two lenses, like technical and adaptive challenges. And we talked about sometimes there's a technical challenge on the measurement of value. And what Mirko described then was actually sometimes you can show them those things and actually have them in place, and people don't want to look at it as well. So I think that falls into the adaptive challenge. And this comes into the leadership question that we're talking about, Maria, around influencing leadership and sponsorship for change. 100% change to sustain change, it's a team sport. It's a team sport. It's everyone from bottom up, top down, and every single person on this meetup, I'm sure, could talk to 40 examples of either direction where it broke. And maybe you got so far, and we've used all the models that we've got. You've got Switch, we've got ADKAR, we've got all sorts of change strategies that we all employ. And it takes every single one of them when you're talking about large scale, complex, sustained change. And so leadership plays a massive role here. And it tests us in all sorts of ways where we need to develop more mastery around how we influence and acknowledging, is that a technical challenge here? Are we missing a framework, a tool, or whatever? Or is this an adaptive challenge? Is it cultural, behavioral? Are we valuing, where things are at the moment and not valuing the discomfort and conflicts to get through to change as well? And I think as we get better at having those conversations, and that means making lists of your stakeholders in all directions to try to work out, yes, you'll have the ones that are with you and are supporters. And yes, start there from a change perspective, go where the energy is and get some wins early on. But to influence leadership and longer term, you have to move from that, and you have to start moving and working and spending time with maybe the leadership that doesn't quite understand it yet, hasn't quite seen it, or has seen the data and the value but isn't quite on board yet. And that can be a really long-term game if you've got the time and space to do that. I feel that in the coming economic climate, there isn't going to be time for that long 1-2 years to get a particular leadership a person on side. We're going to have to be able to move faster, and I think that'll be really challenging. And so going into those spaces for change, really question up front, do you have what you need to succeed? And if you don't, you know, maybe being a little bit more demanding around calling that out and what this is going to take, and are we all on board up front, and making sure it's got the sort of enough of that leadership support, I think can really help get through those first speed humps, because there will be speed humps.
You made a really good point there, and I wanted to throw something in there that I've had plenty of conversations over the last 6 months, because you talk about the kind of there's will be a lot more short-term notice, short-term kind of focus, and if you think about it, what I just said was, you know, the really senior leads are kind of better on the journey than the middle ground. But if you look at organizations, the people in the middle are actually the one that lasts a lot longer in the organization. Like, so if you look at kind of the average length of a CIO slot, right, it's actually becoming shorter and shorter. And guess what that means? If you come in and you take a CIO and you know you only have 18 months or 24 months before you're going to be moving on again, well, you're not going to invest into these kind of long-lasting changes that you need, right? Because you see yourself as transitory. And I think that's really, really bad for our industry, right? Because what that means is that we will never get to the point that we do the stuff that is required, but not possible in very short periods.
Yep, so don't be afraid to ask for what you need in that.
Yeah, a lot of coaches,
and make it permanent. Yeah.
They're a little bit afraid to challenge and ask those pointy questions because the market's tight at the moment. So people are, you know, beggars can't be choosers, and people need to keep roofs over their head, and they want to ask those questions, but they really are struggle. They're in this moral dilemma around having to be employed versus choosing work where they know they're set up to succeed. But it's a good tension, as Mirko said.
And it's interesting because we see the belt tightening, but it's not necessarily that we see that there's less work, right? So it's, I mean, how much of that is actually translates into numbers? Because even if you look at unemployed number and things like that, they haven't actually exploded.
Right? We've actually had the highest employment rates in this country. Yeah, just FYI, yeah.
Right. So clearly there's a perception that doesn't necessarily match yet what we see, and perhaps it's coming, but who knows? Hopefully not. But so is it just a perception thing that we are managing at the moment?
I think it's an identity crisis, and Maria, I think that points to your questions about the future.
Yeah.
As a segue, you know, where are we going now? If all these people are sitting there going, well, wait a minute, I'm not a delivery person, I'm a behavioural influencer. What do they do with now?
What roles do you apply for example, right?
What's next? Yeah. And look, my answer is I think it's this consulting perspective or persona. We need to think about, well, what's my problem? What have I analysed to come up with a proposed solution, and how am I implementing that solution to show impact and uplift in whatever I'm being measured against, as opposed to the coaching stance where you're opening up a space and co-creating and influencing and nudging and enabling. It's very different. So I think this consultancy mindset is something I'm encouraging anyone I am mentoring to deeply consider and think about.
Yeah, I think the consultancy mindset paired up with the science, like the data lens, I think to your point at the start, I think that's a little bit of the secret combination. Donna's saying we have to present options and introduce trade-offs. There will be new roles, so we shouldn't be too wedded in the title. So I guess if we were to open up the conversation then to what does the Agile community need to do to then support this change? How do we evolve? Then maybe it's actually not being too fussed about the title. It's more about what outcomes and impact are we having. Any thoughts on that?
I guess maybe can I just jump in that I didn't follow a traditional agile coach background. I don't have a development background. I came from digital experience and digital sales, so very customer focused. So actually, before, when I worked with agile coaches, I actually really struggled with some of that, staying really far back and not demonstrating what you can do, because there's just so many things in this. There's so many people that don't know what good looks like, and unless you can actually show them and help them visualize it, they don't know what they're aiming for. So there's that as well. Like, there's so many things to unpack here. Like, I never followed a traditional path. So, you know, in Better, Sooner, Safer, Happier, you've introduced new role titles, which people may or may not be comfortable with. You know, there's IBM Garage, there's the value orchestrator in there. There's so many different flavors out there, but it's more about, you know, kind of what are the capabilities and what are the opportunities and how are you enabled, that if you look at the role, that's probably much more something that you should pin yourself to, rather than, you know, I actually really struggle to find the agile kind of coach that I'm looking for because of that misunderstanding as to what the role is really there to achieve.
Marco, did you have something to add there?
No, yes, I always have something to add, as you know. But I do think the role title, and Donna, I really like what you said, but because I think it is the finding a way that you're adding value to something, and that can be on all along the spectrum, right? And you know, we haven't even touched on the other thread that we keep, that I think many people have in the back of their head, with AI coming in and a lot of the engineers being replaced by AI and all that kind of stuff that you hear, which again has a very similar thread to me, where it's, at the end of the day, we are working with people and we need to enable the organizations to get better, right? And whatever that takes. And I think we need to encourage people to increase their tool belt, to just understand more broader things and not being so niched on a specific methodology or specific technique or a specific tool or those kind of things, and much more about like problem solving, like consultancy, right? I mean, that's what it is. It is listen to your stakeholders, understand what their problems are, and then help them solve them, right? And if you realize that you don't have a tool in your tool belt that helps them, then go away and see what other tools you can pick up on. Like, to me, that is what, like, across the board, some people are more technical minded, their tool belt is more technical, but they should have some of the kind of procedural and database stuff as well. And then, like, if you are more behavioral based, then perhaps understand a little bit more on architectures and technologies so that you help being able to solve those problems a bit better.
So I think from a capability perspective, it's data-led or more scientific. How do we take a problem-solving stance? Consultancy, so listen, identify problems. It's influencing. Those are the things, you know, the four kind of core things that we've spoken about today. What else? Capability-wise, what things do we need to be, that we know already that we need to get better at?
I do think that tech space plays a role, Maria. Like, I don't think you can afford to be in this space and not understand at least the kind of high-level tech stuff that means you understand the limitations of it or the promises of it. Otherwise, you're just not credible.
And do you mean like the tooling that supports ways of working, or do you mean
the kind of the IT part of it? Like, you know, like what does it mean to have an environment? What does it mean to work in the cloud? Like that kind of tech, not Jira versus ADO versus whatever. I think that's, yeah.
No. And factors like uncertainty and tech debt and how much they affect what we do. I was also considering, you know, the word agile and where it came from, and terms become toxic over time as well. So, you know, it will change, and the field has expanded broadly. There's so many facets to it that arguably weren't there or weren't developed in the beginning, and that's absolutely normal. But yeah, some of the terms will change, and it's adapting and having the skills and the breadth to help in some space.
Maria, if I may, I just want to offer a counterpoint to what Mirko said. Almost pendulum swinging right the other way. I think in a post-COVID, disconnected, fractured world, we need to do better than just getting the numbers right on the cost of change. I think we need to more deeply connect to purpose in the holistic sense. So what is the organisation trying to achieve? And does it create meaning for the employees? And is that employee proposition something that attracts and engages and retains talent and allows us to tap into their discretional effort over and above, you know, logos, pathos, ethos? We want to go it's not a logos world. We feel our way through the world. So as agents of change and ways of working people, I think it's upon us to say, well, why are we here? Why does this organisation even exist and have a boundary? And the triple bottom line, we're way past that now. And I know Better, Sooner, Safer, Happier recognises that by trying to have a purpose that's beyond just delivering accelerated value flow. And, you know, on a personal basis and source agility, I'm doing a lot of work now in purpose-led organisations. And a lot of my work is saying, yes, we've got a backlog, but what's the bigger meaning going on here? And then if you take that down to the individual, we need to be better at saying, well, what does an employee see as work in a Zoomer sort of generational way? So I think there's some other things in there, Marie, that we probably don't have time to unpack now, but it's certainly not all the numbers and metrics and tools.
Yeah, so I'm because I'm also very purpose-led, Niall, totally aligned with that. And I think a lot of people are. I think it's just about articulating what is that purpose for you and how does that then align more holistically. I think the bit, though, that you started to touch on, which from a capability point of view, that I think I've been seeing as well, is we all need to get better as strategic thinkers. How do we step out onto the balcony and think about what is the impact holistically? And then how might we then break that down? How do we sense? How do we respond? How do we adapt? How do we know what to listen to versus not? And I think as agile coaches that are sensing and responding ways of working and how to get shit done in a better way, like we need to be thinking that way too, because part of our role is to actually help execute strategies and get better outcomes. So we need to have that skill set in our toolbox, I think, too. So we've got someone, no, don't have their hand up, but Ben.
I was just going to jump in.
Oh, go for it.
Right, quickly. It turns out that when you're a co-host, you can't put your hand up, or at least I can't find the button. So I work at the University of Technology in Sydney, and obviously we're a purpose-driven organisation. We have a very clear purpose. But I also teach there. So I work in IT doing stuff, and I also teach in a business school. And what I teach is management consulting. And historically, that's largely been sort of two things. One is structured problem solving, which anyone here who's ever worked for one of the big consulting firms will recognise. And the other one is how to build a persuasive business case using logos, pathos, ethos. That Niall just talked about, and that's what I wanted to jump on. What I've added to that, and I'm working with the subject coordinator now, is adding in a section around storytelling, because it helps to really take people on that journey. University, it's like shooting fish in a barrel, finding someone who's passionate about what they're doing. But it's the same in every organisation. I've worked for banks, credit reporting agencies, telcos, you name it. I've been practically everywhere. Everybody has that, like, there are lots of people in those places that have a purpose, and sometimes you just need to remind them or ignite that passion and go, no, look, you can do agile and serve your purpose. And a story will win over on data a lot, in my experience, but that's just a story. So
it wins 100% of the time. Right, so Ben,
but that's an interesting, Patrick, because what you're saying there is it's a very interesting thought, because one of the things that people struggle with is that they are so far removed from that purpose, right? For no other reason, like I work for the best organization with the best purpose in the world, but I'm so far in the weeds that I can't see how my specific contribution adds. And I think that's where stories become so powerful, because they connect through like layers and layers of organization. They can connect because this bit that we did here enabled this thing out there, like whichever way, which metrics will never be able to translate.
Yeah, I got to watch, well, not watch, I had to sit outside because we couldn't fit, but one of my young intern staff just graduated from her first class honours degree. And we went and took a photo outside the university with her in her gown and her cap. And I walked around at the hundreds of other students and thought, they should all be lining up for a photo with me. Without me, none of them could have got their degree. But how do we tell that story? Like, obviously, I can't just shout out, hey, get a photo with me. But it is. And I don't think about that every day. But then just suddenly when it's my friend who's smiling and got tears in her eyes because she's so happy, it really did. It changed the way I thought about it.
I can imagine.
You'll have to share that photo, Patrick. So maybe last question to round it out is from Ben. How can we as Agile coaches who work on improving the individual and the collective interior over just measuring the individual and collective exterior, which many companies tend to focus on? I don't know, Ben, if you wanted to add anything a little bit more to your question before we tackle.
Yeah, super quick because I'm conscious of time. This is kind of like understanding, we talk about the value we bring to organizations, and if a bunch of accountants are reading it, they're only interested in the external, what numbers there are, how many courses you've got, what qualifications you are, and how much you cost, quite frankly. But what about, we do a lot of work in our organization about working with the senior people, about their collective understanding of we and how we work internally as a we in their teams, and the transformation that has got nothing to do with numbers and et cetera. We can just deploy that to them to do. And also going back to that point there about the individual purpose and value of what are you doing, the motivation that then brings. So what can we do around almost like traversing slightly in, lean does an awful lot of stuff around the exterior stuff, but what can we really do in our coaching capacity to work with collective we's and teams and enable them just to be enable their self-discovery in a way that we just possibly, we can bring lots of tools and stuff, but there's ways that we just can't imagine that these people are gifted to be able to bring forward. So it's a question around what else could we do?
Yeah, here's a crazy thought just to finish, and a hypothesis I carry that I have some data to support. A lot of the work I do is to help people and those little collective we's create meaning that doesn't have anything to do with the organization's purpose, but that engages them and helps them get stuff done. Like if I have an agile release train that's shipping every couple of weeks and they look back and they say, wow, we did that. Even if half the features, as Mirko was saying, aren't used, they feel they're contributing. So by setting up an agile delivery system, we can see that things are happening. I heard a story the other day of a health insurer who are doing a Salesforce program, haven't shipped anything in 2 years. How engaged do you think they'd be? You know, that's frightful existence, isn't it? So I think Agile has a chance to get some stuff done. It feels good, tick it off. Brilliant. And then of course, you've got the bigger organizational purpose, which we make an attempt to connect our work through to. So I think it works on a couple of levels.
Em, did you have anything to add?
I kind of liked where Niall was going there. I think it's have some fun while we're doing it, people. It's, you know, it's important. I'll leave it at that, Maria.
I think that's a good way to end. Well, thank you, Mirko, Emily, Niall, and everyone else. Great conversation today. I quite enjoyed it. I hope you all did too. We will pause it there. And if anyone wants to pick up and have more of a discussion on this, happy to, because I think this is going to be a topic for the next 6 months that we're going to need to explore. But have a good rest of your evening tonight. And I do have a cheeky 3-question poll for you. At the end of this one, just to do a bit of a check from a community perspective, if you're getting what you need out of these sessions. But yes, thank you, everyone. And until next time.